that all my family are feeling. We also share with so many of you in the United Kingdom, in all the countries where the Queen was head of state, in the Commonwealth, and across the world, a deep sense of gratitude for the more than 70 years.
At 76, King Charles just made a confession that nobody saw coming. For decades, we all believed Camilla was his one true love, but what he just revealed about another woman has left the world absolutely stunned. The palace tried to bury this secret for years, but the truth is finally out. You won't believe who she really was, and why their love story was erased from history.
Been part of my life for so long. I started reading when I was very, very young with a father who was a fervent bibliophile. So from the age of 2 or 3, he used to sit and read to us children and take us on wonderful adventures sort of all over the world.
The story of Charles's love life cannot be told without understanding the unique pressures faced by someone born to wear the crown. Unlike most people who can follow their hearts freely, Charles had to balance personal feelings with royal duty, public opinion, and centuries of tradition. Every relationship was examined, every potential partner scrutinized, and every decision weighed against what was considered appropriate for a future monarch. This tension between duty and desire would define much of his romantic history. During his 20s, Charles found himself navigating a complex social landscape where expectations from the royal family often clashed with his own desires for genuine connection. It was during this formative period that he received some rather unconventional guidance from someone who understood the pressures of royal life all too well. Lord Louis Mountbatten, his great-uncle and trusted mentor, took a surprisingly modern approach to advising the young prince about romance and marriage. In a letter dated July 9, 1974, Mountbatten offered Charles advice that might seem shocking coming from a member of the old guard. According to historical records, Mountbatten essentially told Charles that he should enjoy his youth and have relationships before settling down. However, when it came time to choose a wife, Mountbatten advised that Charles should select someone suitable, attractive, and with good character, preferably someone young who had not yet fallen in love with anyone else. This advice reflected the traditional view that a future queen should be, in many ways, a blank slate who could be molded into the role. Armed with this counsel, Charles embarked on what would become an extensive dating history. Throughout the 1970s, his name was linked with more than 20 different women. Some of these relationships were brief and superficial, while others left deeper impressions on both Charles and the women involved. The British press followed his romantic pursuits with intense interest, speculating endlessly about which woman might eventually become queen. Charles himself seemed aware of the weight of his choices. In a BBC interview conducted later in 1974, he spoke candidly about the difficulty of finding a partner. He explained that choosing a spouse was particularly challenging for someone in his position because he would be marrying someone who might one day become queen. The woman he chose would need to be someone special, capable of fulfilling a role that came with enormous public expectations. It was clear that Charles understood his marriage would be about more than just personal happiness. Yet despite these practical considerations, Charles did experience genuine romantic feelings during his younger years. His first significant love came while he was a student at Trinity College, Cambridge, in the late 1960s. There he met Lucia Santa Cruz, the daughter of the Chilean ambassador to London. Lucia was 5 years older than Charles, sophisticated, intelligent, and worldly in ways that captivated the young prince. According to biographer Sally Bedell Smith, Lucia was much more than just another romantic interest. She was charming and played an influential role in shaping Charles's understanding of what love and companionship could be. Royal observers and family members later described her as the first real love of his life, a relationship that went beyond surface attraction to something more meaningful and formative. What makes Lucia's role in Charles's life even more significant is what happened next. In one of history's more ironic twists, Lucia, believing she could help Charles find a suitable match, decided to introduce him to someone she thought would be perfect for him. That someone was a young woman named Camilla Shand. According to Jonathan Dimbleby, who wrote an authorized biography of Charles, Lucia confidently told the prince that she had just the girl for him. While Charles's romance with Lucia eventually ended, she remained part of his life as a trusted friend and confidant. She had not only been his first serious love, but had also unknowingly set in motion what would become the most important and enduring relationship of his life. The connection between Charles and the woman Lucia introduced him to would span decades, survive 2 marriages, and ultimately lead to a union that many thought would never be possible. As Charles moved through his 20s and into his 30s, he continued to date within aristocratic circles. These relationships often had the advantage of shared backgrounds and understanding of royal life, but they also came with their own complications. The young women Charles dated knew that any relationship with the heir to the throne would mean intense media scrutiny and a complete transformation of their lives. The pattern that emerged during these years was telling. Charles sought genuine connection and companionship, yet he was also bound by expectations about what kind of woman could become queen. She needed to have the right background, the right breeding, and, ideally, no romantic history that could become a source of embarrassment for the royal family. These requirements, products of their time, would prove to eliminate many women who might otherwise have been suitable partners. Royal biographer Christopher Wilson later observed that Charles had a series of relationships with women who, while attractive and charming, were often chosen as much for how they appeared alongside him at public events as for any deep emotional bond. Some relationships were genuine and heartfelt, while others seemed to serve more as companionship for the formal occasions and social gatherings that filled his calendar. The prince was searching for something real, but the circumstances of his life made that search extraordinarily complicated. Looking back at this period of Charles's life, it becomes clear that his romantic journey was shaped by forces beyond his control. He was trying to find love while simultaneously preparing for a role that demanded sacrifice and duty above personal desire. The advice he received, the expectations placed upon him, and the traditions he was expected to uphold, all conspired to make his path to lasting happiness far more difficult than it might have been for someone born outside the constraints of royalty. As Charles continued his search for a suitable partner, he found himself drawn to women who moved in the same aristocratic circles as the royal family. One such relationship was with Caroline Longman, a young woman whose family connections to the royals ran remarkably deep. Her mother, Lady Elizabeth Lambert, was not only well known at court, but had also served as a bridesmaid at Queen Elizabeth II's wedding to Prince Philip. This close friendship between the families extended across generations, with the Queen herself serving as Caroline's godmother. Given these long-standing connections, a romance between Caroline and Charles seemed almost natural. Their relationship blossomed during the 1970s and was characterized by a casual, comfortable quality that suggested genuine compatibility. They were frequently spotted together at polo matches, where Charles would play while Caroline watched from the sidelines. The couple also spent time driving through the countryside in his Aston Martin, enjoying moments of relative privacy away from the constant attention that followed the prince. On the surface, everything about their pairing made sense. They shared similar backgrounds, understood the expectations of royal life, and their families were already intertwined. It was the kind of match that would have pleased tradition-minded observers who believed that royalty should marry within their own social class. Yet despite these advantages, the relationship eventually faded. Perhaps the spark simply was not strong enough, or maybe the weight of what a commitment to Charles would mean proved too daunting. Whatever the reason, Caroline and Charles parted ways, though the friendship between their families continued for years afterward. Interestingly, Caroline's connection to royal drama did not end with Charles. Decades later, her sister Rose Hanbury would find herself at the center of tabloid speculation, though this time involving Charles's son, Prince William. In 2022, rumors swirled about an alleged affair between William and Rose, who had become the Marchioness of Cholmondeley and a member of British high society. Both the royal family and the Hanburys firmly dismissed these allegations, with sources close to both parties calling the rumors completely unfounded. Nevertheless, the speculation persisted in certain media outlets, demonstrating how the aristocratic world that Charles once dated within continued to intersect with royal life in unexpected ways. While the romance with Caroline Longman may have been a footnote in Charles's romantic history, another relationship during this period came far closer to resulting in marriage. Davina Sheffield was a woman who, according to royal expert Penny Junor, could have been described as the soulmate Charles was searching for. When they met, Davina was 24 years old and possessed qualities that went far beyond mere physical attractiveness. As the granddaughter of the late Lord McGowan and sister to future Prime Minister David Cameron, she had the aristocratic credentials that the royal family valued. But Davina was more than just well-bred. She had intelligence, spirit, and shared many of Charles's interests, making her not only a potential partner, but also a genuine friend and intellectual companion. There was, however, one significant complication when Charles first set his sights on her. Davina was already in a relationship with James Beard, a powerboat racer. For many men, this might have been a deterrent, but Charles was determined. According to Junor's account, the prince was so persistent in his pursuit that Davina eventually ended her relationship with Beard. For a time, it appeared that Charles had found exactly what he had been looking for. Their relationship flourished, and people close to the couple began to whisper about the possibility of an engagement. The match seemed promising in every way. Davina understood Charles, shared his passions, and appeared capable of handling the demands that would come with being his wife. But as had happened before in royal history, the strict conventions of the monarchy intervened in what might have been a lasting union. As media attention on their relationship intensified, journalists began digging into Davina's past. What they uncovered would prove fatal to any hopes of marriage. The press discovered that Davina and James Beard had previously lived together, a revelation that in the context of the 1970s was considered deeply problematic for a potential future queen. The fact that she was not, in the terminology of the time, intact became an insurmountable obstacle. Today, such considerations might seem absurdly outdated and invasive, but in that era, the expectations placed on royal brides were unforgiving. Despite Charles's deep feelings for Davina, the relationship could not survive the scandal. According to Junor, the revelation killed the relationship stone dead, and Charles was devastated by the loss. It was a painful lesson in how royal tradition could override even genuine love and compatibility. The situation with Davina was particularly frustrating because it followed a pattern that had already affected Charles's romantic life. Years earlier, Camilla Shand had been dismissed as a potential bride for similar reasons related to her romantic history. The unwritten rules of the monarchy demanded that a future queen be virtually without any romantic past, a standard that eliminated many otherwise suitable women, and one that stood in stark contrast to the advice Lord Mountbatten had given Charles about enjoying relationships before marriage. After the heartbreak with Davina, Charles's search for a bride continued, and his attention eventually turned to Lady Sarah Spencer. Sarah was the eldest daughter of the 8th Earl Spencer, and seemed like another promising match. Their relationship began in 1977, but unlike Charles's usual approach to romance, Sarah proved to be remarkably candid about their courtship. She spoke openly to the press about her relationship with the prince, a level of frankness that went against the discretion typically expected of those connected to the royal family. This openness did not sit well with Charles, and their romance quickly fizzled out. However, Sarah's role in Charles's love life was not quite finished. Rather than fading into obscurity after their breakup, she took on an unexpected role as matchmaker. Sarah would later claim that she introduced Charles to her younger sister Diana, saying that she was Cupid in bringing them together. Whether this introduction was intentional matchmaking or simply a natural result of Charles spending time with the Spencer family remains a matter of some debate, but Sarah's influence on what would become the most famous royal romance of the century cannot be denied. With Sarah Spencer in his past, Charles continued his quest for a suitable bride. By 1980, his attention turned to Lady Amanda Knatchbull, the granddaughter of Lord Louis Mountbatten. On paper, Amanda represented perhaps the most ideal candidate Charles had yet considered. She was intelligent, poised, and shared many of Charles's interests. More importantly, she understood him on a personal level, having known him through family connections for years. According to royal biographer Howard Hodson, Amanda found herself genuinely drawn to Charles. She appreciated his energy, his enthusiasm, his sense of humor, and his kindness. She saw qualities in him that the public often missed, including a modest self-deprecation and a depth of character that revealed itself in private moments. There was genuine affection between them, built on years of family connection and shared experiences. When Charles proposed marriage to Amanda, it seemed like the culmination of everything he had been searching for. Here was a woman who knew him, understood the demands of royal life through her own family service, and possessed all the qualities that tradition demanded of a future queen. Yet Amanda's answer was not what Charles hoped to hear. She hesitated, and ultimately, she declined his proposal. Her rejection was not born from any lack of care for Charles as a person. Instead, Amanda had witnessed firsthand what life in the royal spotlight meant. She had seen the relentless scrutiny, the loss of privacy, and the overwhelming pressure placed on anyone who stood beside the heir to the throne. Having observed these realities from close proximity, she made the difficult decision that she did not want that life for herself. The weight of becoming a royal spouse was simply too much to bear, regardless of her feelings for Charles. This rejection must have been particularly painful for Charles. Here was someone who knew him well, who understood both his strengths and his vulnerabilities, and who still chose to walk away from a future together. It represented yet another instance where the circumstances of his birth and position had prevented him from finding lasting happiness with someone he cared for. After years of searching for a suitable partner, Charles's path would eventually lead him to Lady Diana Spencer, though their first meeting was far from momentous. In 1977, Diana was just 16 years old when she was introduced to the prince through her older sister Sarah, who was romantically involved with Charles at the time. The young Diana made little impression on Charles beyond being, as he would later recall, a very jolly and amusing and attractive 16-year-old. He remembered her as great fun, bouncy, and full of life, but she was simply too young to be considered as anything more than a friendly acquaintance. 3 years would pass before their relationship shifted into something more significant. The catalyst for this change was tragedy. In August of 1979, Lord Louis Mountbatten, Charles's beloved great-uncle and mentor, was killed in an IRA bombing while on his boat in Ireland. The loss devastated Charles, who had relied on Mountbatten not just as family, but as a trusted advisor who understood the unique pressures of royal life. It was during this period of grief that Diana, now 19, reached out to Charles with genuine sympathy. In private recordings that were later released in the documentary Diana in Her Own Words, she recounted a conversation where she told Charles that he had looked so sad walking up the aisle at Mountbatten's funeral. She said she thought it was wrong that he seemed so lonely and that he should have somebody to look after him. These words, spoken with apparent sincerity and concern, seemed to touch something in Charles. Perhaps in his vulnerable state, Diana's warmth and caring nature appeared to offer exactly what he needed. The relationship between them developed quickly after this reconnection. By November of 1980, Diana received what many considered the ultimate test for any potential royal spouse. She was invited to Balmoral, the royal family's private estate in Scotland. This invitation was significant because it represented the family's serious consideration of Diana as a future member. The visit apparently went well, as just a few months later, in February of 1981, their engagement was officially announced to the world. The public reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Diana seemed like a perfect choice for the future king. She was young, beautiful, aristocratic, and appeared to embody a modern freshness that the royal family needed. However, the couple's first joint interview following the engagement announcement provided an early hint that all was not quite as perfect as it seemed. When an interviewer asked the couple if they were in love, Diana immediately responded with enthusiasm, saying, "Of course." Charles, however, gave a response that would be analyzed and debated for years to come. He said, "Whatever in love means." At the time, many people dismissed this comment as typical Charles awkwardness, or perhaps an attempt at philosophical musing. Looking back, however, those 4 words suggested a fundamental disconnect between what Diana felt and what Charles was willing or able to give. While she had fallen genuinely in love with the idea of their fairy tale romance, Charles seemed to view their relationship through a more pragmatic lens, as a suitable arrangement that fulfilled his duty to marry and produce heirs. Despite any underlying concerns, the wedding plans moved forward with spectacular grandeur. On July 29, 1981, the world watched as Diana walked down the aisle at St. Paul's Cathedral in London. An estimated 750 million people tuned in globally to witness what was being called the wedding of the century. Diana's dress, with its 25-foot train, became instantly iconic. The ceremony had all the pageantry and romance that people expected from a royal wedding, and to outside observers, it appeared to be the beginning of a genuine fairy tale. The couple welcomed their first son, Prince William, in June of 1982. 2 years later, in September of 1984, Prince Harry was born. Charles now had his heirs, fulfilling one of the primary expectations of his marriage. On the surface, they appeared to be a successful young royal family, carrying out their duties and raising 2 children who would one day continue the Windsor line. But beneath the public facade, serious problems were developing. The foundation of their marriage had never been as solid as it appeared. Charles and Diana had known each other for only a short time before their engagement, and their relationship had not been built on the kind of deep emotional connection that sustains a marriage through difficult times. Diana, who had been 19 when they became engaged, was still figuring out who she was as a person, all while trying to adapt to the overwhelming demands of royal life. The pressures on Diana were immense. She was constantly photographed, constantly judged, and constantly expected to perform her role flawlessly. She struggled with bulimia and depression, conditions that were poorly understood at the time and which she felt unable to discuss openly. Meanwhile, Charles found himself frustrated with aspects of Diana's personality and behavior that had not been apparent during their brief courtship. The differences between them in temperament, interests, and emotional needs became increasingly difficult to ignore. By 1986, just 5 years after their fairy tale wedding, Charles had rekindled his relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles. Camilla had married Andrew Parker Bowles in 1973, but her connection with Charles had never fully disappeared. According to various accounts, their affair resumed as Charles's marriage to Diana deteriorated. While Charles would later acknowledge this relationship, he maintained for years that the affair only began after his marriage had irretrievably broken down. Diana, for her part, also sought comfort outside her marriage. She became involved with James Hewitt, a former cavalry officer who had been hired to give her riding lessons. Their affair lasted several years and would later become public knowledge, adding another layer of complexity to the already troubled royal marriage. Both Charles and Diana were looking elsewhere for the emotional connection and understanding they could not find with each other. As the 1980s progressed into the early 1990s, it became increasingly difficult to maintain the pretense that the marriage was working. The media, which had initially celebrated the union, now documented every sign of trouble. Photographers captured moments of tension between the couple, body language experts analyzed their interactions, and unnamed sources began leaking stories about the state of their relationship. The situation reached a critical point in 1992, a year that Queen Elizabeth herself would later describe as her annus horribilis, or horrible year. In December of that year, Prime Minister John Major stood before Parliament and formally announced that the Prince and Princess of Wales were separating. He emphasized that there were no plans for divorce and that the succession to the throne was not affected, but the announcement confirmed what many had long suspected. The fairy tale marriage had failed. The separation period was marked by continued media scrutiny and public relations battles. Both Charles and Diana participated in interviews and cooperated with biographies that presented their versions of what had gone wrong. Diana's famous interview with the BBC's Martin Bashir in 1995, where she spoke about there being 3 people in her marriage, referring to Camilla, shocked the nation and further damaged the royal family's reputation. Finally, in August of 1996, the divorce was finalized. Diana was stripped of her title of Her Royal Highness, though she retained the title Princess of Wales. The settlement gave her a substantial financial package and ensured she would remain involved in her sons' lives. For both Charles and Diana, the divorce represented the official end of a union that had been troubled almost from the beginning. Tragically, Diana's life after divorce would be cut devastatingly short. On August 31, 1997, news broke that shocked the world. Diana had been killed in a car crash in Paris. She had been traveling with her companion Dodi Fayed and their driver Henri Paul when their car crashed in a tunnel while being pursued by photographers. The news sent shockwaves around the globe, and the outpouring of grief was unprecedented. Millions of people mourned the woman they had called the People's Princess. What had begun as a romance that promised to be a modern fairy tale had ended in divorce and, ultimately, tragedy. The marriage between Charles and Diana produced two sons who would carry on the royal line, but it also revealed the dangers of marrying for duty rather than love, and the impossibility of maintaining a relationship under such intense public scrutiny when the foundation was never truly solid to begin with. To truly understand the complexity of Charles's romantic life, we must return to where his greatest love story actually began, long before Diana entered the picture. The summer of 1970 marked a turning point in Charles's life, though he could not have known it at the time. At a polo match in Great Windsor Park, a young woman named Camilla Shand was introduced to the prince, and according to popular accounts, she made quite an impression with her opening line. The story goes that she told him her great-grandmother had been the mistress of his great-great-grandfather, King Edward VII, and playfully suggested they continue the tradition. Whether those exact words were spoken remains a matter of some debate among historians. But what is certain is that Camilla and Charles formed an immediate connection. Unlike many of the women Charles had dated, Camilla possessed a relaxed confidence and sense of humor that put him at ease. She was not intimidated by his position, nor was she overly impressed by his title. Instead, she treated him as simply Charles, a man rather than a prince, and that genuine quality was something he found deeply refreshing. Charles would later describe their early relationship as blissful, peaceful, and mutually happy. Here was someone with whom he could be himself, someone who shared his interests and understood his sense of humor. Camilla enjoyed country life, horses, and hunting, all passions that Charles held dear. More importantly, she did not seem to need him to be anything other than who he was. There was an ease to their connection that Charles had not experienced with other women, a natural compatibility that suggested they were genuinely well-suited to each other. But happiness and compatibility alone could not overcome the rigid expectations of royal tradition. As their relationship grew serious, it became clear that certain obstacles stood in their way. Camilla had a romantic history, having previously been involved with Andrew Parker Bowles, a cavalry officer who moved in similar social circles. By the standards of the time, this past made her unsuitable as a potential bride for the future king. The unwritten rules demanded that a future queen should be, if not entirely innocent, at least without any publicly known romantic entanglements. There was also the matter of timing and Charles's own hesitation. He was still young, not yet ready to commit to marriage, and he was facing pressure to focus on his naval career and royal duties. Lord Mountbatten, his mentor, while fond of Camilla personally, did not consider her an appropriate choice for Charles's wife. The advice Mountbatten had given Charles about sowing his wild oats before settling down seemed to work against any immediate commitment to Camilla, despite Charles's feelings for her. In 1973, while Charles was away on naval duty, Camilla made a decision that would alter the course of multiple lives. She accepted Andrew Parker Bowles' proposal and married him. According to various accounts, Charles was hurt by this development, but he had not been in a position to offer her marriage himself, and Camilla was not willing to wait indefinitely for a commitment that might never come. She was, after all, a practical woman who understood the realities of her situation. Charles went on to marry Diana in 1981, and for a time, it seemed that both he and Camilla had moved forward with their lives. They each had their separate marriages and growing families. Camilla and Andrew had 2 children, Tom and Laura, while Charles and Diana had William and Harry. To the outside world, these appeared to be 2 distinct couples living separate lives within the same social circles. However, the connection between Charles and Camilla never truly disappeared. They maintained a friendship throughout the years, one that their respective spouses were aware of, though the exact nature of that friendship remained a source of tension. Diana, in particular, was acutely aware of Camilla's presence in Charles's life from very early in their marriage. In what has become one of the most famous revelations about their troubled relationship, Diana discovered a bracelet that Charles had commissioned for Camilla just before his wedding to Diana. The bracelet featured intertwined initials and was intended as a gift, a symbol of a connection that clearly had not ended with Charles's engagement. This discovery was deeply troubling for Diana, confirming her suspicions that she was not the only woman in Charles's heart. She would later describe feeling that there were 3 people in her marriage, making it rather crowded. This awareness of Camilla's ongoing importance to Charles poisoned the relationship between Charles and Diana from its earliest days, creating an atmosphere of jealousy, resentment, and mistrust that they could never overcome. By 1986, 5 years into his marriage to Diana, Charles had resumed his romantic relationship with Camilla. Both were still married to other people, but their respective marriages were struggling. Charles and Diana had grown increasingly distant, their incompatibility becoming more apparent with each passing year. Meanwhile, Camilla's marriage to Andrew Parker Bowles was also facing difficulties, though they would maintain their marriage for several more years before divorcing in 1995. The affair between Charles and Camilla during this period was conducted with as much discretion as possible. But in an age of increasingly aggressive media coverage, keeping such a secret proved nearly impossible. In 1993, transcripts of an intimate phone conversation between Charles and Camilla were published in the tabloids, causing enormous embarrassment for both of them and the royal family. The conversation, which had been secretly recorded years earlier, revealed the depth of their emotional and physical relationship in graphic detail. The scandal rocked the nation and severely damaged Charles's public image. Many people who had sympathized with Diana in her troubled marriage now felt their suspicions confirmed. Charles was portrayed as a man who had betrayed his beautiful young wife for an older mistress, and the public reaction was largely hostile. The revelation made Charles's position incredibly difficult, as he faced criticism not just for having an affair, but for the particular nature of his relationship with Camilla, who many saw as less glamorous or suitable than Diana. Despite the public humiliation and criticism, Charles and Camilla's relationship endured. After both of their divorces were finalized, Charles in 1996 and Camilla in 1995, they were finally free to be together openly. However, the path to public acceptance and eventual marriage was still long and fraught with challenges. The royal family was cautious about how to handle the situation, particularly given the intense public affection for Diana and the hostility many felt toward Camilla. Diana's death in 1997 complicated matters further. The outpouring of grief for Diana was unprecedented, and in the immediate aftermath, any public appearance by Camilla seemed unthinkable. Charles found himself in an impossible position, trying to mourn the mother of his children, while also maintaining his relationship with the woman he loved. He had to proceed carefully, mindful of his son's feelings and the public mood. Gradually, over the following years, Charles and Camilla began to appear together more publicly. The strategy was to slowly normalize their relationship in the public eye, allowing people to become accustomed to seeing them as a couple. Camilla attended events with Charles, met his sons, and began taking on some public duties. It was a careful, measured approach designed to win over a skeptical public that still mourned Diana and viewed Camilla with suspicion. By 2005, enough time had passed and public opinion had softened sufficiently that Charles and Camilla felt able to marry. The wedding, held on April 9th, was a much more modest affair than Charles's first marriage. There was no grand ceremony at a cathedral, no television audience of millions. Instead, they had a civil ceremony at Windsor Guildhall, followed by a religious blessing at St. George's Chapel. The Queen did not attend the civil ceremony, though she did attend the blessing and the reception afterward. Camilla became the Duchess of Cornwall rather than Princess of Wales, a decision made out of respect for Diana's memory and the public's continued association of that title with the late princess. It was understood that when Charles became king, Camilla would become queen consort, though even this was initially presented with some ambiguity due to concerns about public reception. Now, as Charles and Camilla approach their 20th wedding anniversary on April 2025, their relationship has been tested by time and has emerged as something remarkably enduring. What began as a romance in 1970, interrupted by decades of separation, other marriages, scandal, and public disapproval, has ultimately resulted in a partnership that has lasted. Charles is now king, and Camilla stands beside him as Queen Consort, a title that was officially confirmed during the late Queen Elizabeth's Platinum Jubilee, when she expressed her sincere wish that Camilla would be known as Queen Consort when the time came. The journey from that first meeting at a polo match to their current position has been anything but straightforward. It has involved heartbreak, controversy, and choices that many have questioned. Yet for Charles, at 76, the story of his love life ultimately circles back to where it began, with Camilla. Whether one views their relationship as a great romance that overcame all obstacles, or as a relationship that caused great pain to others, depends largely on perspective. What remains undeniable is that theirs is a connection that has survived longer than many thought possible, proving that sometimes the heart knows what it wants, even when tradition, duty, and public opinion say otherwise.